Let's talk about mentioned before that there might be hits on civilian electricity grids and stuff like that. And I remember when Trump was on one of his many talking tough tirades, I guess, where he's talking about blowing up bridges as well. It was when people started to go, hang on, like there is a massive segment of the Iranian population that do want the regime to fall, that do want the US to win this. Is that the kind of thing, though, that could swing public perception back in the regime's favor? I saw the Wall Street Journal say, and like, obviously, it is so hard to get any accurate reporting on how Iranian people are feeling with what the regime is doing. But there are hardliners in Iran that are using public fervor to say, actually, we're in a pretty good bargaining state. We're not going to be overthrown anytime soon. Would that kind of civilian hits actually hurt the US cause with the Iranian people?
The issue there is not just the target, is mostly the messaging behind it. If the messaging from the Washington administration was that the United States will take out any asset that enables regime's repression, just to pave the way for the Iranian people to rise up, and that could include power grids in addition to other institutions such as Revolutionary Court or Basij bases, then that might be able to one way or another resonate with the average Iranian. But that's not Trump's rhetoric. He seems to be implying that the idea in his head is still somehow punishing regime officials to the point that they would agree to a deal. And that is the main challenge there. So the average Iranian now seeing this, one is still, I think, surprised that the president is under the assumption that you can make a deal with terrorists. But two is under the impression that now you're going to take out all these power grids and you're going to use us as a pawn to pressure the regime so you can get a deal of your own. So it's not the target, as the messaging behind it. But that said, if the communication or diplomatic campaign was very clear to the average Iranian that the end goal here is their freedom, and I'm not speaking for myself here, I'm citing the president when he started the war on February 28th, when he said the hour of freedom is at hand to the Iranian population. So if that's the case, you can certainly make the case, make the point, because if you ask the average Iranian, and I know you mentioned maybe a significant portion of the population that are anti-regime, we know for a fact, and looking at the polls and population turnouts and the repression, that it's a significant majority. I think putting a number on it is hard, but it is enough for us to see the regime as illegitimate. Now, if you want to speak to them, their idea is that infrastructure can be rebuilt, and whether that's going to be petrochemical centers, power grids, or military assets, you can always rebuild them. Of course, it might take time, it needs investment, but we cannot revive the tens of thousands of young Iranian protesters who were unarmed that were massacred in the street. So that's why I do think that, the tolerance of the average Iranian is higher than we suspect, only with the end goal of regime change. But if that's not communicated, then we risk alienating majority of Iranians that are pro-American, pro-Israel, and want the regime gone.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was talking about this last week on the show, which is this nauseating way that the Western media is covering Iran. Because we've got here in Australia, we've got the ABC. I've also seen reports from the New York Times with this flowery language talking about the funeral for Iran's former leader. And I just think to myself, like, they all include these lines like, okay, we're only taken around the country to places that the regime would allow us. And, we can't trust that the people the regime would let us talk to are emblematic of the Iranian people. But I just think, like, that doesn't quite go far enough. Like, you can't, if you're a journalist in Iran and you've got a regime handler with you and you're only told, hey, talk to that person, don't talk to this person, go down that street, don't go down that street. You can't trust a single thing that is being told to you by anyone, and you can't trust a single thing you're seeing. I remember, like, the ABC report I'm thinking about shows us a billboard that they say is popular in Tehran, and it's written in English. And I just think that's not popular in Tehran. That is regime propaganda for a Western audience, or it wouldn't be written in English. Like, why? When you see these reports from the New York Times, from all these other outlets, in this way of like, wow, Iran, they're really mourning their leader. Like, how angry do you get?
Very frustrating. And this is coming from a person who grew up in Iran, who partook in protests. I've seen all these propaganda campaigns up close. I was arrested for my participation in a civic movement. We've lost friends, family, and loved ones to this regime. And to see this, to see journalists, and if I may paraphrase what you said, prioritizing access over integrity of journalism. And that's what we see. Like, and I think CNN did something similar. I was watching a segment, quite infuriating, and they were interviewing, I think, quote unquote, local or ordinary Iranians. And every individual was either a Basij member or was an Ayatollah. It was a clergy. So I don't know what, to them, what an average Iranian looks like, because that is certainly not average. But to your point, if you're covering regime propaganda in such detail with such limited freedom to move, that is not a caveat. That is simply playing into their propaganda. And I remember growing up in Iran, there were a few instances that I came across a Western journalist that was, I think, talking to random youth or what you have it. And of course, they had a handler with them. And as soon as we wanted to, and I was one of the very few people that was speaking English to the person, I was immediately cut off, not allowed to talk to this guy. And he was immediate, and I was immediately shooed away by security forces. So to say it's choreographed, it's an understatement. Now, to quickly, last point on that, the regime parades and covering that, the propaganda angle of that. I know for a fact, and this is something I witnessed, they have to bring in people from other parts of the country because local turnout is never sufficient for propaganda purposes. So they bus in people from not, of course, outside of Tehran. And a lot of it is for financial incentives. Many of them are impoverished individuals that are genuinely there for food in addition to ideological reasons. Sometimes they replay situations from years ago, claiming that is a recent regime rally. So it's inherently such a lazy propaganda campaign, and to see Western journalists emboldening it as if they were the ones that have the courage to be inside Iran, or as if they were the ones that is somehow getting nuanced information. If the regime is allowing you to cover it, that means it's playing into their propaganda, plain and simple.
And then, back to that Trump clip at the start, that's when he starts talking about, like, whose side are you on? Because you can either paint the Iran war, which, I think you believe is accurately, which is the US versus an Iranian regime, which is also at war with its own people, or you can portray it the way Iran would, which is the US versus Iran in like two equally powerful beings. And like, I think that is the key to Trump's frustration there.
It is, and to be more clear, I think the more accurate description there would be really the United States against the Islamic Republic, because there is nothing Iranian about the regime in Tehran currently. The biggest enemy of the Iranian people is the Islamic Republic. When they commemorate the Iranian New Year by hanging dissidents, it's such a demonstration of clear disdain of Iranian culture and heritage. And I think that's what they do. They try to play into a sense of nationalism. I'm talking about the Islamic Republic here. All of a sudden, that they used to bash nationalist sentiments. The former supreme leader used to demonize Iranian nationalism, saying Islam is the only way and nationalism is at odds with Islam. All of a sudden, they're claiming to be the defenders of Iranian national interest. What's interesting is that to the average Iranian, that is clear nonsense. That was rejected months, if not years ago, by ordinary folks. They see this as a war between a regime that's murdering them, they're not even representing Iranians, it's there to represent a Shia supremacist interest, bringing in non-Iranians to murder the Iranian regime versus the United States. And anyone that plays into that in a way that claims that somehow the Iranian people might be the victim and caught in the crossfire, that might be the case. And the real, of course, villain here, the demon here is the Islamic Republic that one is imposing this war, and two is deliberately positioning different military assets in residential areas and using its population as a human shield so it could play the victim on the international stage.
I want to end on this note. Sorry, the naval blockade, you say, is quite key to bankrupting the regime. It's how they get their oil out. Based on what we can tell from Iran, like, how weak is this regime? How possible could actual regime change be here?
Depends on the strategy. Weak in a sense that they don't have enough. I mean, the stockpiles are gradually depleting. They still have sufficient amounts of short-range missiles and drones, which is why they can attack the Strait of Hormuz or the Persian Gulf Arab states. But they're gradually running out of the medium-range ones that are used to target Israel. Probably one of the reasons why the regime has not attacked Israel in the recent escalation. So that's one. But when we talk about stability, it's really about how many individuals are willing to take up arms and I'm talking about not missiles here, but simply AKs and pistols and machine guns, to open fire at protesters. And unfortunately, there is enough of them left. So if regime change or regime collapse is actually on the agenda, then the approach should really mirror that, in a sense that these limited strikes on military assets is not going to empower dissidents. If you really want to go about that route, you have to do basically what Israel did in the first few weeks of the war, taking out these sites that are used for internal security, and also taking out checkpoints that are put in place by these repression forces, terrorizing the ordinary folks, and pair that with a communication campaign. I know you and I talked about it extensively last time as well. So if that were to be the approach, regime change is definitely within reach because they're running out of money. They've never been more illegitimate. Their image has been shattered because they've suffered such a devastating blow. Their supreme leader, all their key individuals were gone, and the funeral for them took months. And even then, they had to use propaganda to elevate it more than it was. But right now, it's really, when I say the ball is in Trump's court, I cannot be exaggerating this because that's what the Iranian people want. That's what Israelis and also increasingly the Arab states want, is really about systemic transfer of power in Tehran, and not hoping that one way or another incentives or pressure is going to moderate regime behavior. Because as you and I said, you cannot get reform or any sort of behavior change from such an Islamic republic.
I don't think so. Sorry, the world is waiting to see what Trump's next move is. And when we see that, hopefully you'll join us again. Jonathan Sayer, Foundations for the Defense of Democracy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.